So, today we're reading in 2 Kings chapter 9, and it says, And Elisha the prophet called one of the children of the prophets, and said unto him, Gird up thy loins, and take this box of oil in thine hand, and go to Ramoth Gilead. And when thou comest thither, look out there Jehu the son of Jehoshaphat the son of Nimshi, and go in, and make him arise up from among his brethren, and carry him to an inner chamber. Then take the box of oil and pour it on his head, and say, Thus saith the Lord, I have anointed thee king over Israel. Then open the door, and flee, and tarry not. So the young man, even the young man the prophet, went to Ramoth Gilead. And when he came, behold, the captains of the host were sitting. And he said, I have an errand to thee, O captain. And Jehu said, Unto which of all of us? Unto which of all us? And he said, To thee, O captain. And he arose and went into the house, and he poured the oil on his head, and said unto him, Thus saith the Lord God of Israel, I have anointed thee king over the people of the Lord, even over Israel. And thou shalt smite the house of Ahab thy master, that I may avenge the blood of my servants the prophets, and the blood of all the servants of the Lord at the hand of Jezebel. For the whole house of Ahab shall perish, and I will cut off from Ahab him that pisseth against the wall, and him that is shut up and left in Israel. And I will make the house of Ahab like the house of Jeroboam the son of Nebat, and like the house of Baasha the son of Ahijah. And the dogs shall eat Jezebel the portion of Jezreel, and there shall be none to bury her. And he opened the door and fled. Then Jehu came forth to the servants of his Lord, and one said unto him, Is all well? Wherefore came this mad fellow to thee? And he said unto them, Ye know the man and his communication. And they said, It is false. Tell us now. And he said, Thus and thus spake he to me, saying, Thus saith the Lord, I have anointed thee king over Israel. Then they hasted and took every man his garment, and put it under him on the top of the stairs, and blew with trumpets, saying, Jehu is king. So Jehu the son of Jehoshaphat the son of Nimshi conspired against Joram. Now Joram had kept Ramoth Gilead, he and all Israel, because of Hazael king of Syria. But King Joram was returned to be healed in Jezreel of the wounds which the Syrians had given him when he fought with Hazael king of Syria. And Jehu said, If it be your minds, then let none go forth nor escape out of this city to go tell it in Jezreel. So Jehu rode in a chariot and went to Jezreel, for Joram lay there. And Ahaziah king of Judah was come down to see Joram. And there stood a watchman on the tower in Jezreel, and he spied the company of Jehu as he came, and said, I see a company. And Joram said, Take in horsemen, and send to meet them, and let him say, Is it peace? So there went one on horseback to meet him, and said, Thus saith the king, Is it peace? And Jehu said, What hast thou to do with peace? Turn thee behind me. And the watchman told, saying, The messenger came to them, but he cometh not again. Then he sent out a second on horseback, which came to them, and said, Thus saith the king, Is it peace? And Jehu answered, What hast thou to do with peace? Turn thee behind me. And the watchman told, saying, He came even unto them, and cometh not again. And the driving is like the driving of Jehu the son of Nimshi, for he driveth furiously. And Joram said, Make ready, and his chariot was made ready. And Joram king of Israel and Ahaziah king of Judah went out, each in his chariot. And they went out against Jehu, and met him in the portion of Naboth the Jezreelite. And it came to pass, when Joram saw Jehu, that he said, Is it peace, Jehu? And he answered, What peace, so long as the whoredoms of thy mother Jezebel and her witchcrafts are so many? And Joram turned his hands and fled, and said to Ahaziah, There is treachery, O Ahaziah. And Jehu drew a bow with his full strength, and smote Jehoram between his arms, and the arrow went out at his heart, and he sunk down in his chariot. Then said Jehu to Bidkar his captain, Take up and cast him in the portion of the field of Naboth the Jezreelite. For remember how that, when I and thou rode together after Ahab his father, the Lord laid this burden upon him. Surely I have seen yesterday the blood of Naboth, and the blood of his sons, saith the Lord, and I will requite thee in this plat, saith the Lord. Now therefore take and cast him into the plat of ground, according to the word of the Lord. But when Ahaziah the king of Judah saw this, he fled by the way of the garden house. And Jehu followed after him and said, Smite him also in the chariot. And they did so at the going up to Gur, which is by Ibleam, and he fled to Megiddo and died there. And his servants carried him in a chariot to Jerusalem, and buried him in his sepulchre with his fathers in the city of David. And in the 11th year of Joram the son of Ahab began Ahaziah to reign over Judah. And when Jehu was come to Jezreel, Jezebel heard of it, and she painted her face, and tired her head, and looked out at a window. And as Jehu entered in at the gate, she said, Had Zimri peace who slew his master? And he lifted up his face to the window, and said, Who is on my side? Who? And there looked out to him 2 or 3 eunuchs. And he said, Throw her down. So they threw her down, and some of her blood was sprinkled on the wall, and on the horses, and he trode her under foot. And when he was come in, he did eat and drink, and said, Go, see now this cursed woman, and bury her, for she is a king's daughter. And they went to bury her, but they found no more of her than the skull and the feet and the palms of her hands. Wherefore they came again, and told him, and he said, This is the word of the Lord which he spake by his servant Elijah the Tishbite, saying, In the portion of Jezreel shall dogs eat the flesh of Jezebel. And the carcass of Jezebel shall be as dung upon the face of the field in the portion of Jezreel, so that they shall not say, This is Jezebel. So there's a lot of stuff in this chapter, and a lot of good lessons we can take. A lot of stuff also that points to the book of Revelation and the different types of the Antichrist and what goes on with the nation of Israel in that time. Jehu is a type of the Antichrist. It says in Revelation, it talks about the horsemen, and one of them goes forth to conquering and to conquer. And again, it says that Ahaziah was asking peace, peace. And so we see different aspects of Israel and how Jehu is a type of the Antichrist coming and ultimately exacting vengeance on carrying out the will of God to a certain extent, but at the same time only within the aspect that he's part of prophecy, because ultimately Jehu, while he purged out the house of Ahab, who is also a type of the Antichrist, he worshipped the same idols that he destroyed. So there are just different aspects. A lot of these kings represent different aspects of what we see in the book of Revelation, and later in what we see in Isaiah and Jeremiah, and throughout all the major and minor prophets. But what I'm going to take out of this is specifically, it says, starting in 2 Kings chapter 9, verses 7 through 10, it says, And thou shalt smite the house of Ahab thy master, that I may avenge the blood of my servants the prophets, and the blood of all the servants of the Lord at the hand of Jezebel. For the whole house of Ahab shall perish, and I will cut off from Ahab him that pisseth against the wall, and him that is shut up and left in Israel. And I will make the house of Ahab like the house of Jeroboam the son of Nebat, and like the house of Baasha the son of Ahijah. And the dogs shall eat Jezebel in the portion of Jezreel, and there shall be none to bury her. And he opened the door and fled. And so, when Ahab was alive, he did a lot of wickedness. And it says that, this prophecy is given back in 1 Kings to Elijah to give to Ahab, that God is going to cut him off. But he decided not to do it in Ahab's lifetime, because Ahab, near the end of his life, repented him after, I can't remember what it was that happened. Something happened, and he repented. I believe Elijah came and appeared to him and told him this, and he repented him with sackcloth and ashes. I don't have cross-references in this, and I'm not really sure how to use these cross-references. Let's see. Oh, that's not helpful. Well, I'll be right back. Okay, let's see. 1 Kings chapter 18, it says, 18 is when he appears to Ahab and Elijah does his sign of the altar being hit by fire, the fire of God, and then to prove who's the true God. And then and then at the end of 1 Kings chapter 21, so Elijah comes and finds him. By the word of the Lord, Elijah's out in the wilderness or whatever, and the word of the Lord comes in and says, go meet Ahab, king of Israel. And Ahab's just riding along in his little chariot, and Elijah gives this condemnation right here that we just read to Ahab. And Ahab, actually, after he hears these words, he humbles himself, and I'm not sure if he actually repented, but he humbled himself, and so God says in verse 29 that he wouldn't bring this evil in Ahab's days, but after his days. And so Ahab died at the end of 1 Kings, and it's been since that time that this prophecy has not been fulfilled. And there have been several kings since then. And it's really kind of the timeline of the beginning of 2 Kings is a little obscure because it often refers indirectly to the king, because the focus goes more to Elisha, who was the person who filled the room of Elijah after Elijah was taken out of the world to wherever it was that he was taken. And I assume into heaven, but I mean, I don't know, because I'd have to do a study on that. But the focus is on Elisha, and so the timeline of the kings since the death of Ahab is not necessarily super clear. We could go to Matthew 1 and see exactly who, in retrospect, well, we couldn't go there. The timeline of the kings of Israel is sometimes a little bit difficult to see. I think there's a place in Chronicles, but I'm not going there. The point is that a lot of time passed between when Elijah delivered this prophecy to Ahab and when it was actually carried out. But the point is here that this prophecy is being carried out, and what the next few chapters are about Jehu carrying out this prophecy, destroying completely the house of Ahab. And so it reminds me of the simple fact that God acts in due season, and he delivers vengeance to the people who are deserving of vengeance, who have done something against him, like all of us, in due season. Which means that there is a season where you can get by without having to put up with the consequence or the vengeance, or God saying now's the time for you to answer for what you've done. But the day will come, and here it has come in this chapter for the house of Ahab, that the time, your season where you avoided punishment is gone. This time has come for punishment. And, he exacts complete and total vengeance. And to the complete destruction of the house of Ahab, just like the house of Jeroboam, and just like the house of Baasha. And so, what we can learn from this is that sometimes, let's go to Galatians 6, 7 through 9. Sometimes choosing to do something that we know doesn't please God, that pleases the flesh or pleases somebody else, we think it's okay because, we don't have to account for it right away. We won't have to, suffer appearing and being accountable before God immediately. We can get by. We can just do it, and odds are, nobody's going to care for a while at least. So for a season, we can enjoy sin, and sin is enjoyable. But as tempting as that can be, to walk in sin, to walk in the flesh, because we can for a season get by with it, what we need to truly remember is that God is not mocked. It says, "Be not deceived, God is not mocked. For whatsoever a man soweth, that shall he also reap. For he that soweth to his flesh shall of the flesh reap corruption. But he that soweth to the Spirit shall of the Spirit reap life everlasting. And let us not be weary in well-doing, for in due season we shall reap, if we faint not." So, what we see here is that not only is God not mocked, and to be mocked would to be like him to say, you've done this and it doesn't please me, and then the person to get away with it, and to be laughing at God and say, ha ha ha, I got away with it. God is not mocked. He delivers to every man according to that he has done. And as any man sows, he shall also reap. Now, the sowing and reaping is an important picture because when we choose to walk in the flesh, when we choose to please the flesh or do a work of the flesh, like Ahab worshiping his idols and stealing pieces of property and killing prophets, that every time we do that, that's like sowing to the flesh. And the fruit of that, which is corruption, which is death, and just corruption even in this life, it can be corruption, not just eternity. A lot of time that corruption bleeds over into this life. It's not just an eternal consequence, it's also a very physical and seeable consequence as well. But it's not because that's where the focus is. The focus is that it is truly eternal corruption, that it corrupts the things that we are doing that could potentially be good. But that corruption doesn't necessarily manifest itself right away. It comes in due season. So for a season, we can get away with sowing to the flesh, but once spring rolls around and all the winter snows melt and the stuff starts to germinate and come up, there's no stopping, because we have already planted all this crap, and then it's there. It's all briars and thorns and corruption and who knows what else. And at that point, it's too late. There's nothing you can do about it, because God says he is not mocked. But the alternative is true also, because sowing to the Spirit means that we may not, to do that which is good, to do that which pleases God and not ourselves, we aren't necessarily going to see the benefits of that and the fruit of that right away. The fruit will, come in due season. But what our responsibility is to not faint, because it's very easy to faint when you spend all of your labor and your time sowing something that you don't see, and you can think, oh, well, this stuff the fruit never comes. There will never be fruit of this, because you just keep putting seeds in the ground and you never see them come up. Well, it's just because it's not the right season. And, we don't know what the right season is. That's why it's our responsibility to be not weary in well-doing and to faint not, because this is our responsibility, is to faint not. We're supposed to continue in the faith, grounded and settled, and be not moved away from the hope of the gospel. And that is definitely a challenge, but in due season. I would much rather, when the day of reckoning comes, when the season, appears for the fruits to be gathered in, that I don't have corruption, that I have life everlasting. And that's a very powerful thing in retrospect, because when the day comes, and the house of Ahab is getting utterly destroyed by Jehu, I bet they're thinking, man, I wish Jehu hadn't, the house of Ahab is getting utterly destroyed by Jehu, I bet they're thinking, man, I wish Ahab hadn't utterly offended God so that he wanted to completely destroy our house. Maybe they weren't thinking that, maybe they were. Maybe they are thinking that as they're cast into hell for the rest of their life. I have no doubt that that's in their mind as they're stuck there. Either way, they're probably regretting that decision and wishing that they could do it back. And so it's powerful in retrospect, because then you see the consequence. It's hard though now, looking toward the future, to say I shouldn't be sowing to the flesh because I don't want to reap corruption. It's hard, because in order to have that be a good, to help that motivate us to not sow the flesh, means that we have to believe that the day shall come, and to have that belief effectually work in us so that we are convinced and fully persuaded that it's not worth it, because we do not want to get on God's bad side. And ultimately, we all started on God's bad side. What we have to do every day is to walk in the Spirit. And that's really all we got to do, is to sow to the Spirit and just not sow to the flesh. And it's very easy to lose perspective sometimes, but this is why we have places like this in 1 Kings, where we have reminders. Here's an example of someone who offended God, and the day came and he was destroyed. So while it may seem like the season goes on where the wicked don't receive for the wickedness that they do, or that we can get away with sin, while it may seem that sometimes that season goes on forever, it doesn't go on forever. The next season always rolls around, and when that time comes, it can even be in this life. It doesn't have to be after a person has died and appeared before God. They start reaping what they have sown. So we need to remember that and be wise, because a fool is just like, oh, I'm not going to care about the future. I'm just going to do what I want to do now and not worry about what happens later. And even Ahab, who was wicked, when Elijah delivered him that condemnation of his house, even Ahab, who was the most wicked king in all of Israel and a type of the Antichrist, he understood the severity of that condemnation so much that he humbled himself. So, there's definitely a lesson that we can take from this, to understand the gravity of how important it is that we pay attention to whether we're sowing to the flesh and the lusts of the flesh, or if we're sowing to the Spirit. So that's what I get out of 2 Kings chapter 9.